Boddington, for those, everyone will know Boddington, but for those that don't know it, it's a long chuck venue in the winter. We're casting anything, probably the shortest cast is 50 metres and the longest cast could be 100 metres plus. So the most important part probably is choosing the right rods, because my attitude's always been, if you can't reach the fish, you can't catch them. And location is key at Boddington, just as it is at many venues in the winter. So I have two rods that I use at Boddington. I've got the 13-foot Aventus distance, which is my starting rod. Some people would say a little bit overgunned for 50 metres, but like if I say I'm starting at 50 metres, what I'll be doing is follow the fish out. So I might start at 55 metres, catch one, or don't catch one, move to 60, 65, 70. And it's nice to do it on one rod. With this rod, I can go anywhere from sort of 50 metres up to, if the conditions are good, just about 100. So it covers a lot. So I can keep creeping out on one rod. It's awkward having to swap between two rods, particularly if you're peeling line off and you're not 100% certain if you're at 60 or 62, for instance. So 13-foot Aventus distance, loads of power, nice handle length for chucking. Reel, mini big pit, tournament QD. You need a big reel if you're going to be chucking long distance, cranking big fish, etc. So that'll always be my starting rod. Before I talk to you about obviously what's on the reel, etc., and my bottom end setup, I also take a 14-foot Aventus distance. That's what I call Big Bertha. On a brilliant day, it doesn't come out, because hopefully I'll just keep creeping out, catching a few fish, and I'll stay on the 13-foot, because I've not got to that stage where I think I need a fish and my best chances at range. But if I need to go 100 plus, then the 14-foot distance feeder, that's going to be the rod I'm use. One thing I will mention, and a question I get asked a lot on social, is what quiver tips. Both rods are loaded with 3-ounce tips. I've tried going to 5-ounce just to see if they stiffen the rod up, but if anything, I lose a little bit of distance on 5-ounce. 2-ounce is too soft. Again, you lose distance. 3-ounce for me, for distance fishing with a 13 and 14, is the optimum tip. So if you're struggling to know what tip to use, 3-ounce is perfect. Bearing in mind, we're not looking for little tiny pulls and knocks. When you get a bite, it's literally going to fold your rod in half. So that's your rod, both with the same reels on them. Distance is key. So we need a low diameter reel line that casts really well. So we've got 5.3 pound Pulse Pro, 018 diameter, nice and fine. It literally flies through the rod rings. So low diameter, lowish stretch. Stretch isn't massively important to me when I'm doing this type of fishing, because as I've said, when I get a bite, it's going to hook itself, and the bite's either going to be a big drop back or a pop and pull round. So £5 Pulse Pro, but if I want to chuck like distance, I can't cast a big heavy feeder off £5 Pulse Pro. So I need a shot leader, and that's where £12 Shield comes in. I could use 10, but I'm a big believer in minimising the chances of any sort of disaster. And 12 flies through the rod rings, and I don't get any crack-offs. And the other thing about a leader is, for those that know Boddington or venues like it, there's a lot of rocks on the inside. So when I'm playing fish on the inside, if the line does come into contact with a rock, I want it to be the £12 Shield, because it's very abrasion resistant, low stretch. It's a shot leader material, basically purpose designed with this type of fishing in mind. So leader length is another question I get asked a lot. I do it on arm's length, but obviously everyone's arm's lengths are different. So what I would say to you is, when I'm in the casting position for like places, for Boddington, because it's quite snaggy on the inside, etc., I go with a slightly longer leader. So when I'm in the casting position, ready to cast, I'll have 6 to 8 turns on the reel. So when you're like that, ready to cast, if you look at the reel, I'll have 6 to 8 turns on. That's a long leader for me though. If I was going on a venue where there were no sort of obstructions or snags on the inside, I'd probably look for 2 to 4 turns. Obviously, the longer the leader, lose a tiny little bit of distance, but we're talking minuscule. So slightly longer leader at Boddington, and that's the £12 Shield. Feeder choice. Boddington is tough in winter. A lot of you watching this might have fished it in summer and be thinking it's a 5 keep net job. The fish climb up the bank. In winter, it's anything but. Quite often I'm fishing for 2 to 5 bites to win a zone, or even win a match. You know, we had a match the other day, 3 fish, 60 pegs, 3 fish won the whole match. So you're not having loads of chucks. We're not looking to build a peg. We're not looking to build a swimmer. We're not looking to cast repetitively into the same spot. So every cast has to be perfect on the money. So it's a big feeder. The way I look at it, big water, big feeder. my casting times could be anything from 20 to 45 minutes. You know, I know that some people will scoff at this. I've even had times when it's been really tough, where I've gone to an hour and had a bite, well, tried to go to an hour, had a bite to win me a zone at 56 minutes. So there's a case of the longer the feeder's been in the water, the more chance you've got of getting a bite. When your feeder crashes into Boddington in the winter, doesn't matter how nicely you put it in, you're going to spook fish. So the less cast you can have, the better. So every cast has got to count, and you've got to believe that your bait is fishing perfectly, as in effectively. That's why I choose a hybrid feeder. It's got the raised sides, and it protects the bait. If you're going to leave your feeder on the bottom 45 minutes, you've got to know you've got bait on that feeder. If you think you haven't got any bait there, you're just going to play mind games and you're going to want to reel in early. And as I've said, the more casts you have, the less you're going to catch. So big feeder, 45 gram is my starting weight feeder. As I said, hybrid because it protects the bait. Long black stem with a heavy elastic, the X-Safe system. The reason I go the long stem, it helps with casting. It acts like a dart, the stem of a dart in flight, helps it to cut through, means it goes nice and straight. It means you can be more accurate and get more distance. Another thing I'll mention is also favour the speed stems with a little speed bead at the bottom, because it gives the hook length the pivot. So if you, like with a normal loop, if you double loop in, it becomes fixed. So when your hook bait, say, starts to break out, when it's fixed there, it goes like that and pulls your hook bait away, which isn't a disaster, but I want my hook bait to be there. And I just feel that movement that the speed bead gives, obviously with the loop, is really, really important. So hybrid feeder, I tend to use them in 3 sizes. 45, if conditions are good, 45 gram will do me from 50 metres to sort of 95 metres. Once we start going over 95 metres, or let's say conditions are bad, massive wind in my face, I'm really having to blast it, then we're looking at like 55 gram or 60 gram. It's important, particularly with a 14 foot. If I put the 45 grammer on the 14 foot, it doesn't really load the rod. So you can put the 45 grammer on there and think, I'm not really getting much more distance. Put the 60 gram on and you get that rod working and you'll gain a lot more distance. So they're the 3 sizes I use. All big, as in all large hybrids, 45, 55, 60. I'd always try and fish the 45 because I do want to use as light a feeder as I can get away with, but I've got to be accurate and I've got to make every cast count. So hook lengths, basically all my hook lengths are tied to 4 inch. I believe that's the optimum length. It gives a nice bit of movement, allows hook bait to move, but not so much movement that obviously a carp can get away with it easily. In terms of hook sizes, size 10 QM1s, I don't think there's a better hair rigging hook. You know what I mean? Like, I'm probably going to lose my next fish now, but I lose very, very few fish, and I think that's down to size 10 QMs. And I'm a massive, people say 10's big, but the Boddington fish are, at the minute, they're averaging £10. And even at somewhere like Barston, where you might want to go long chucking in the teens or something like that, the carp are big, they're £10. And I honestly believe, can't find it a lot more difficult to deal with a big hook. So like, if you set 16 on, I think you hook fish by what I call confidence, as in they shuck it in, they don't realise anything's wrong, and they swim off, and a bit of luck, you catch it somewhere in the mouth on the way out. Whereas with a 10, it's heavy, it turns, and I find probably 99% of my fish are hooked in either the bottom corner or the middle of the bottom lip, and you lose less fish as a result. So a big hook, and the way I fish my wafters, I will mention as well, 4 inches 019 N gauge. Even for Boddington, I could go to 022, and some do, but I find 019 is heavy enough, and it's nice and supple. The heavier you go, the stiffer the line becomes. That's one of the reasons people say to me, would you use fluorocarbon at Boddington? No, it's too stiff. I want something that's a little bit more supple. If I could use braid, I would. But braid's obviously banned at Boddington, so you can't use it. So 4 inches 019 N gauge, then size 10 QM1, and I've got a little bayonet fixed in a loop. And what that means is, basically my hook can lie flat and my wafter sits up. And what I find with the hook flat, wafter up, when they suck it in, the hook turns quicker, which means you get a better hook hold. And like I said, since I've been using this setup for my wafters, I lose far less fish. So literally all it is, little bayonet, tied in a little tiny overhand loop, and I literally just whip over the top of it. One last thing I'll mention, which going back a little bit, something I didn't say, and again, a question I get asked, probably the most popular question I get asked on social is, how do I attach my leader to my main line? All I do is overhand loop about inch and a half in the Pulse Pro, and then a half blood knot with the 12-pound shield to attach the leader, and I literally just trim the knots tight. So I trim the knots tight so it's nice and streamlined. People say, does it slip? No, pull it nice and tight, wet your knots, inch and a half loop in the main line, always in your lighter one, and then half blood knot, trim them knots tight, and it'll fly through them quiver tip rings. That's one other thing I will mention. Depending on what rods you've got, if you're going to chuck a long way and use a leader, make sure the rings on the rod are slightly bigger than normal, just to allow that shot leader knot to travel through. So that's my setup for Boddington. If you fancy a day out there, it's always good for a couple of bikes, so give it a go.